So surprisingly, we're a bit ahead of time. We have 10 extra minutes, which means there is more time for your questions as well. And I'll just say that our discussion will probably structure it in two parts. So first, I have a few questions prepared for you following up on your presentations and your inspiring talks. And afterwards, we will give over more space and more time for the audience, who I'm sure have a lot of questions for the speakers as well. And the discussion today, I would like to focus on participation and come back again to the human factor. We are challenged very often with the image of public cultural institutions and the cultural sector. Different reports keep repeating that despite the public investment, the participation in culture is often still quite limited. We are working with the same audiences, and the policies that Pier Luigi explained in such a human way also, they keep highlighting the importance of engagement and bringing and connecting more and more with different groups of society. So today I would like to speak more with you about involving more diverse audience and more people to culture. And I'd like to address my first question to Pier Luigi, who also underlined so many times the effect of cultural sector, of cultural productions on many different areas of our life and the societal impact of culture. And I would like to ask you, what do you think is the place of this socio-economic impact of culture in the missions and strategies of cultural organizations? Because in some of your talks you mentioned that despite the proven value of culture on different social, economical areas, when culture becomes instrumentalized, it kind of loses the social impact then what's the place in it, the place of it in our missions?
Well, I think that there's not one size fits all kind of idea of mission for cultural institutions. There are institutions that are doing different things, and all of them are important. So there are institutions that are doing research, and this is something that does not happen only on the cultural field. It happens in science, for example. And if you want to do research, it's very much about challenging all the prejudices and sometimes also taking lots of risks. In this sense, it's not necessarily the case that a research institution must be popular or immediately appreciated. After all, we need some time to develop new ideas with the freedom of really taking risks. So, for example, there are certain, let's say, contemporary art museums or theaters that are really taking risks and chances and sometimes also deal with very unpopular issues. They should be protected because their function in today's society is fundamental. At the same time, there are many other institutions that maybe are less committed to, let's say, this radical form of research, or they are pursuing these objectives in a different way. And in this case, it's very much about, again, not, let's say, popularizing or building an audience by itself, but building a constituency, which is something very different, which means also going to the public space. I think that for many institutions today, there is this misunderstanding of what's the role of the public space. Public space, in some sense, is a neutral space. It's a space in which you can really build new kinds of relationships where you do not take control. I totally agree with the idea of vulnerability. You must become vulnerable, because that's the only way in which you can really, in some sense, introject the point of view of the most disenfranchised communities that are vulnerable all the time. So, I think that there is a menu, an orchestra of different possibilities, and the real issue is for every single cultural institution to ask themselves, what does my mission, in some sense, how my mission can make sense with respect to, let's say, the long-term objectives, the kind of context where I sit, my history, and so on and so forth. So do not be mechanical about this, that there must be a certain recipe for the good mission, for the good cultural institution, but it's really very much about what's the context and how can I adapt to this context in the most effective way to deploy my potential.
Thank you. And I'd like to also engage Agata, and you, in your presentation, you also triggered a lot of topics concerning accessibility, and you work a lot in audience engagement, on audience development with culture organizations and in institutions. And audience development as a concept, it is very much related or based on making the cultural services more accessible. So accessible not only in terms of physical or geographical accessibility, but also in terms of economical or psychological sometimes accessibility. Well, but despite that, when we look at the research and statistics and different surveys of the audience, very often we see that the main barriers for participation are often not economic, not geographic, not physical. It's the psychological barrier we have to cross. I would like to ask you, what do you think, how important is accessibility for enhancing cultural participation of the society, and what would you think would be the main challenges in accessibility topic for cultural organizations today?
Well, let me digest that. It's a lot. I'll start with coding and decoding CAT, and in this case, CAT is audience development. Or audience engagement, as we prefer to call it. Agnieszka will tomorrow talk more about it, and she will dig deeper into it, because we understand different things under that term. For me, yes, is connected also to making things more accessible to everyone, to not exclude anyone. So first, it's also about, ensuring that there are also physical conditions, that we make things accessible, and then people have a choice if they're interested in it or not. Is it for them? Is it beautiful? Is it interesting, engaging in a way for them or not? There's this, and then it's a whole process. I call them those barriers, the most difficult barriers. The self-exclusion, actually. It's all about self-exclusion. It's about how we box ourselves. So we put ourselves into the box, not for the people like us, not for the people like me. So I'm not going to go for a classical concert because I'm not used to. I haven't grew up in an opera or in a philharmonic, because I think I did, but I mean, what people usually think, like, that's not for me. I don't know how to dress. I don't know how to behave. I don't know, and that's probably also very expensive. That's not for the people like us. And it's kind of our fault, and it's all connected, because it's a physical space, which is, I'm not even, as I call it, the setter's box. I've called it a setter's box today. So for people with disabilities, because then it becomes far more complicated. Because I'm thinking about, is it for me or not? Do I have a time? Do I want to do it? That's my thinking, Or I'm thinking like, should I stay at home and watch Netflix? Or I should go out and experience some so-called high art, whatever that means. And for the person with disability, it's far more complicated with that, because they're thinking about, okay, how am I going to get there? Is the bus going to be accessible? Is there going to be stairs leading to the building? Is there going to be an audio description? Or sign language interpreter, or captioning, or whatever that else it's needed for that person. So that becomes far more complicated, and because we don't think about it, on one level, people self-exclude themselves, and then we exclude them, and we exclude them also through the language we're using, and through the fact that we don't tell the stories correctly, so that it's not understandable to people to what we're actually doing. It's the reaction, or Paul's son, to contemporary art. like we don't tell the story properly, so people are not interested. And then it also goes back to the mission, to what Pier Luigi said, and I think that it's also about decoding also those terms like missions, strategy, visions, and all that, because it sounds so easy in a way. But developing the mission, it's not only telling the story; it has to come from the hearts, actually, and from the minds of the people who are creating organization. People who are creating an organization, it's not only one person. It's more than one. Sometimes it's 5, sometimes it's 15, sometimes it's 50, sometimes it's 250 or many thousands. And in order for the mission to actually end the vision, to actually work, it has to be based on values, so the importances, and it has to be based on a dream, and it's also about collective dreaming. And it also still, it's a bit decoded. This is the way we see it. Still sounds easy, but it's super difficult, actually. I mean, it's a process. It doesn't happen overnight. And a part of this process is also, answering the question, do we want to make things more accessible to all the people? Because it's an effort. And at this point, it also costs more. Honestly speaking, that costs money. And we are not used to that position in a budget. We have a promotion, we have, a lot of things. Artistic costs, but we don't have accessibility because that's not something we're used to. So in the future, maybe, if the world changes, hopefully we'll go to the direction that will be normal and we're not going to talk about it anymore. And if we make things, accessible, design for all, if we design it well, then we design it well to everybody, and then people can just decide if they like it or not, if they want to come or not.
Thank you. And to design for all, you need to really research and get to know the audience or the needs, right?
You need to want to get to know them. I would start with that. You need to want to get to know them.
Mm. And with that, I would like to move to Paul and ask you, because you also work in Kaunas. We work together on audience development program with Kaunas organizations as well. And again, coming back to audience engagement, audience development strategies, a lot of it is borrowed from business sector, and we will follow up in the afternoon about the ways these two sectors can learn from each other. And one of the things we're learning is how to actually create target-led services, right? Which is based on an idea that we first get to know the need of our audience, and we build on that and create a targeted services, which is really challenges our creative thinking and the way the cultural organizations think. Well, first of all, we have really limited capacity. We cannot think about each and every audience, right? And on the other hand, we want to create the service which is accessible for all. So my question for you is: should we be focusing on target-led strategies? Should we be focusing on learning more about the audience, or instead follow our intuition and not lose the cultural and creative aim here? Paul, are you fine?
I'm terrified now. Agata's laughing because I'm the least strategic person in the room. Yeah, exactly. Well, just while you were talking, I was just thinking about a project in the UK which is called Meet Me at the Albany. And it's a really good example where it's disconnected communities who are often older people. You mentioned retired, where they've got disconnected, but through art activities they come to the Albany Theatre. And I got to know this because we were touring. We were bringing our traditional touring show to the Albany Theatre. You've got the nice space there. You go in, you arrive, you do your performance, you sell 70% of the tickets, and then you go away. You don't have any relationship to that audience. audience. So there's been some marketing done there. They've worked out our show, you know, new writing. Certain people want to come to it, and we'll market to those people. But actually, when we went into the building, it was full of older people, retired people from every background you could possibly imagine, as it is in London, all undertaking arts activities, all making things. So they clearly had created a community, created a context and environment. They have been targeted. And there we were, and we walked into this world where it had been absolutely amazing, and they were like, "Oh, what are you doing? What are you doing then?" "Oh, we're doing a play about, you know, some contemporary issues." "Oh, lovely." And then they go back to actually making their tapestry, and we were disconnected. But that program had absolutely brought to life that community. So they were targeted, of course. You know, absolutely. I understand that when I program my festival, I'm absolutely thinking about two fundamental groups of people: those that I know that will come to see my work, and those that I know that won't come and see my work. So by definition, I am targeting people, and I'm being strategic in that sense. The question is, how much effort do I put into people that won't come and see my work, or that I presume that won't come and see my work? And I know it's kind of controversial what I said, and there's a resonance I could feel from what I said about that Steve Jobs comment. And I kind of stand by it, and I kind of don't. Because it is a kind of controversial thing to say that people don't know what they want until we show them. It's a bit like, I felt like while I was saying that, do you remember the American politician Ross Perot, who, talking to an audience, ostensibly black audience in America, as he was running to be president, he used the phrase, "you people." "Oh, you people don't want to do those kind of things," he said. And suddenly they were, "Whoa, hold on, what do you mean, you people? Now you are separating us, now you are segmenting us, you are separating us that we are different people, some way." And yeah, well, we celebrate difference, but we don't want to be categorized as you people. So it's finding that really interesting balance between engaging with sectors and segments and encouraging and giving the context for people to get involved, whether it's older people getting involved in the community, but somehow not breaking the human factor. So yeah, I'm a big supporter of understanding our audiences and creating the context for them to be involved. But I think we have to be careful we don't separate, go into the you people kind of dynamic.
Thank you.
If that makes sense. I'm just wondering, I'm just sitting here going, these guys up in this interpreter, this is your interpreters, this is real creative bloody process up there. What, I don't know what I'm saying, so how on earth you know what I'm saying, I have no idea. Thank you so much.
Virginia, we have a lot of representatives of European capitals of culture here in the audience, and tomorrow we will also have a focus session on the way European capitals of culture can enhance cultural participation. And I'd like to ask you a question related to that, because in the Capital of Culture guidelines provided by the European Commission, there's a priority included, which is creating new and sustainable opportunities for a wide range of citizens to attend and participate in cultural activities. As also it is underlined the overall strategy for audience development. So I'd like to ask you about what do you think are these new opportunities that Capitals of Culture as a program provide for enhancing the cultural participation, and what do you think would be the impact of Kaunas 2022 on this matter, and maybe what would be the main challenges to achieve that in your view?
Thank you for the question, and it's really big mandate and also possibility and challenge at once for the cities who are bidding for European Capitals of Culture and those who are titled then to implement strategic moves, strategic changes towards audience development or towards participatory culture, because all program requirements now are based on that it's not festival anymore. It's not just business as usual. And we need to make culture which is much more accessible. It means it's for everyone. It's not for those people who already use this culture. That's why maybe here in Kaunas we also started our activities in advance, 4 years in advance, not from making new events and new festivals, but from sitting in small group seminars with cultural operators and raising capacities, thinking about our audiences and rethinking our missions at each organization. What we know about our audiences and what is even more important, what we don't know about possible audiences who are still not our audiences. And one of the most challenging projects we started and launched already last year, it's our community program, community laboratories. We call it Fluxus Labs, because George Mačiūnas, the establisher of the Fluxus movement, is born in Kaunas. So we are trying to engage people in that feeling that everybody has creativity and everyone could be an artist and everyone is an artist, just some people don't know yet. And those cultural laboratories, community laboratories, we try to split in the city and also activities behind or beside the city in Kaunas district. And it also this year and last year, this year and next year, it's also not so many big performances yet on those places, but culture activators, Fluxus agents we call them, they are trained firstly and then they go to their neighbors. We actually recruit them not to other side of the city, but the place we live. And those people now, we have 13 of them. They are trying to activate community and the methods which should be invented by themselves. Actually, I'm so proud about those people because I don't know how in other European countries, but here in Lithuania we don't have such a trainings, nor in Abt Academy or at some other institution to train community activists, community artists. There is no such profession. That's how, through European Capital of Culture program, we are trying to invite a most successful, prominent and sincere activists in that field and connect to Kaunas-based people. And we are trying now this process. So we established now 13 points in Kaunas city and 7 active places in Kaunas district. We call it different names, but doesn't matter. And then it will become about 30 in Kaunas city and about 25 in Kaunas district, active places where people actively engage and create together. But what is the challenge, as you also asked? The challenge is that nobody could teach us how to do it practically. We are listening, learning from each other, encouraging each other, but then you go to the field and you knock on the door of neighbor, inviting him to have dinner together in open space. If weather is good, you never know what follows next, yes? And it's learning by doing. And I really hope that this strategy will be successful in our case. But yes, we need, of course, this passion to last until 2022, because it will be a year with, of course, big international participation, and those communities will invite communities from other European towns and cities to join, and many artistic and cultural productions will be done in 2022. But next challenge, which we are thinking since the beginning, how to sustain those activities, how to make this program sustainable. And I wish for our city, for Kaunas city, that this cultural strategy shall work after 2022 as well.
Thank you. And this evening, in the evening at the Laisvės Avenue, the main pedestrian avenue of Kaunas, you may notice the outcome of the community work in Kaunas and take part in the Courtyard Feast, the annual community picnic on Laisvės Avenue. So yeah, don't run away after the forum. And Fionn, I'd like to go to you. And as we notice this technological advancement and this change of the connection between cultural organizations and the society, there are so many new opportunities for engaging the visitors of cultural organizations, of cultural events more. And probably, you speak a lot about intuition. Probably intuition and creativity are, some of the key values that cultural organizations today can provide for the audience. But despite that, we notice also in the statistics, in the rates of attendance in Lithuania, both in Europe, that museums, galleries are attended less and less, despite the will to participate in culture. How do you think, what are the opportunities here in cultural organizations that we haven't yet discovered? How do we turn the cultural organizations to platforms for creativity of the audience?
Yeah, I'm not really sure, as I'm not really an expert. But just as a creative, what I think one should do is maybe if the people don't come to the museums, then the museum have to come to the people, and you have to maybe bring art and bring culture into the life of people through hacking it. And I very much believe in Jonathan Mese's concept of a dictatorship of art. I think everything has to become art because it's the only solution to have a world in peace and happy, joy is through having a baker who does what he does in the way that it's an art form, and you have to eat bread as an art experience. And a teacher who teaches mathematics, he has to do it with the approach of an artist, and there shouldn't be any compromises about anything you do. I think you need this total awareness, and you know this total empathy, and you need this total intuition, and this has to be in every forms of life. So probably we have to hack the ways people are living and see where are they when they're not in the museum. When they're in front of the computer, then let's go into there. When they're, I don't know, sitting in the park, let's go to the parks. When they love to go to the restaurants, let's go there. So I think this is very important, is to then maybe rethink the concept of a museum. If somebody doesn't go there, then let's redefine how the experience could look like. Yeah, that's my few pennies.
Thank you. We have quite enough time for questions from the audience, and I believe there's a microphone for you also. So if there are any questions in the audience, just please raise your hand and you will be given a microphone. Paulina.
Hello, I'm Paulina Maloj from Wrocław 2016, former European Capital of Culture. And in this experience we worked a lot with audiences, but also with artists, curators, and all the creative people there. And I'm very moved by this idea of this culture free zero, of this thing of going like far away from patronage. The translators are waving, so I think something is probably disconnected. I can translate myself to Lithuanian, sorry.
Maybe I can translate your question.
But of course, kind of automatically, I have some doubts about it. As for, let's call them structural doubts, and namely, what's the answers for such an issues as prestige, the place of this museum? I'm also for it. Why should we look at the artworks in the museum? On the other hand, working with artists is like, they want to, many of them, they want to be shown in museum, even if no one was to come, rather than to be shown in the park, even if someone was to come. And this never-ending struggle of like the high niveau and not so high niveau and public art, and this like line continuum between the so-called high art and culture and the people who can participate and maybe even make art. if everyone, so to put it symbolically, if everyone can make art, where does it leave artists? Thank you.
Ar reikia vertimo auditorijai? Panašu, kad ne.
So I think we should not make the mistake to think that the new regime that is emerging is the only possibility. We really need to work with all three because they have completely different roles. Clearly, the highbrow-lowbrow distinction is a product of the patronage regime, and especially of the European patronage regime, because if we think, let's say, of Okusai, so the master of Japanese painting, is regarded today by the Japanese as the father of manga. Could you imagine that today, in the European prestige system, we would say whether Raphael or Leonardo or Michelangelo are, let's say, the fathers of comics? I mean, that would be, I mean, a laughing stock. And that's the point. So it's very specific. At the same time, it's important because the prestige system, by the way, is not only existing in the artistic field. Again, in the scientific field, why, for example, scientists aim at publishing in Nature, in spite of the fact that only a tiny fraction of people will read that highly specialized scientific outlet. That's important exactly as it is important for researching artists to exhibit in certain museums. Again, there is a spectrum of possibilities. I think that it's very important for us to flexibly use all the various opportunities that we have, which means that certain aspects, for example, of museum engagement, of course, have to, in some sense, reflect itself also in, let's say, in engagement in the public space. But we are not saying that the museum space, in my opinion, has to be abandoned or disregarded or discarded as it's historically been. It's probably also the other way around. The more people are engaging, in some sense, in the public space in situations in which they feel comfortable with, the more they will also be encouraged to go back to the museum and to explore without feeling intimidated. So let's keep all the possibilities open, and especially let's not be defensive about this. I think that today there is a big mistake if traditional cultural institutions feel scared by the fact that now there are these other possibilities, so undermining, so to speak, the consensus behind the museum as an institution. I think the contrary is true. Only if people recognize intrinsically what is the value of culture in the future, there will be, let's say, political goodwill to maintain this financial sustainability of museums. The more we, in some sense, lock into a defensive attitude, the more difficult it will be to defend the future financial sustainability of patronage institutions.
I would like to provoke maybe a little bit or ask you a question. Are we talking about culture for all, or are we talking about cultural institutions for all? Because those are two different things. And the thing is that people, I would very much debate if the participation is decreasing, because if we broaden our thinking about where people meet with culture and art, then we would think that they are actually participating a lot. They are just not participating in the art and culture that we are making. And then I'm asking, are our cultural institutions for all?
Can I? We talk about it a lot, so. To connect it, I completely agree, and I think that that's the thing with the communication. Like when I listen to you, sometimes we say the same things, but we use different words, or we get somewhere, and it's difficult to get out of that at end of the street kind of a thing. It was a cul-de-sac, yeah. Okay, I agree. There is a big difference between culture for all or institutions for all. I would also pick up of what you said, Pierre, about making things. I need to, because of like first. Oh no, I'll start with you, because we went like that. So we went like with arts for all or like that, from Paulina. So we went from, yes, you know, like arts everywhere for everyone, you know, as an obligation in a way, like this everything through art. And I'm not there really, because what if I just don't like it and don't want to do it? So I know that I'm from the culture sector, and I should say that culture and arts is going to say the word. But I don't know. I mean, that's maybe not for everyone. I mean, we don't all have to like exactly the same thing, and that's okay. And we don't have to also experience it in an exactly same way, in an exactly same places. Artists are also different. There are those who don't care about, you know, those old school buildings. They would never go there, even if they would be paid. So they would prefer the streets. You know, they would. Some of them would destroy their works if their works will appear in the prestigious museums. So I think that we need to be aware of those differences, and I think that part of art is actually freedom, and freedom of creation, but also giving freedom to people to decide how they want to participate and engage. And we also, we not really, we need to, I don't like to say have to, but we do have to. We have to change the perception also of participation. What is participation? Very often when we say participating in culture, we still think about traditional institutions, attendance, you know, going out there, being there. Yet, you know, we sit at home watching TV series and all that. That's also art, actually. That's also the way of participating. So it's also about redefining and understanding the different ways of participation. And sometimes, yes, art can come to us in a most unexpected way when we sit at home or when we walk the dog or whatever. But do we all have to love it? That's another thing, you know.
Just add something, because when I talk about it, I don't talk about the art which you see in the museum, the paintings and the sculptures. No? So I believe in that anything and everything can be art. A TV show can be art, and you can suck out art out of everything, and there is art in it. No? So it's not now the classical Rembrandt that we watch Rembrandt paintings on the TV and people will be happy about it. No, they want Game of Thrones, no? And that's also art. And some kind of form.
Surprised. They might fall in love with classical and be surprised with that.
Everything.
But also, just very quickly to defend something, you know, I talked about this image of war, where everyone is focused on everything else, and the idea that a painting came out from a coal mine where it was being held and was then put up on the wall, and that was a specific place where people did gather, and with all of the noise, they did have a focus of somewhere to go, to specifically visit, to see something, to have a reaction. It was in a building, and ironically all the other buildings were flat, where they did go to a particular place to see a beautiful thing and to see beauty in their lives. So they did go to that particular place to see that particular painting. And I think that for them was a beautiful opportunity, you know.
Yeah, and I think Virginia's example about the community program really illustrates also this point that you know, when the program really places the individuals and their creativity in the focus and creates a platform for sharing the creative skills of the individuals or for new artistic forms to appear on the ground.
My question would concern bubbles. So you never mentioned bubbles. I think this is an important thing. We are living in one now. This auditorium is definitely a bubble. And politicians say bubble of Facebook, bubble of Instagram, this bubble around this police officer that demonstrates his muscles on Instagram, and this actors on Facebook. How does one address bubbles? Do you deal with bubble strategies in your daily experiences? Or I'm not talking about institutions. Me and my colleague, I'm coming from the Art Museum, I'm coming from the National Museum, we are ready to go to cafeterias to haunt those people. It's all right. But let's talk about social media and the bubbles forming inside social media. Yeah, because I think it's a really important thing. Thank you.
Well, one quick consideration. The social innovation that led to the explosion of the social media that we witness today was the flourishing of subculture starting from the 50s. So in some sense, these bubbles are inevitable. It's the breeding ground from which the net culture that we know today is emerging. I'm not saying that this is the final outcome. In some sense, the point exactly, at some point, how to break the bubbles, because we understand, in some sense, we are not breathing enough inside of them. But this is something we have to learn to work with. So I'm not particularly concerned, for example, with the highly vocal idea that, in some sense, social media are destroying our sociability. In some sense, the opposite is true, because in bubbles, like in subcultures, like in tribes, this is exactly where our, let's say, moral machinery works. Most of our, let's say, moral emotions, like shame, like hatred, or like sympathy, are emotions that are developed to foster in-group cooperation. So the real point is how we build bridges from this, and how we recognize that the bubble just is not enough. So rather than fighting the bubbles, we should simply create the condition for the bubble to evolve a spontaneous curiosity for what's outside. So we should not take for granted that the bubble is, let's say, the final outcome, but sometimes can be, let's say, a starting point, because people want to feel recognized in their culture. So the bubble is not only negative. The point is, it's not all there is. There is something outside. How can we build curiosity? Curiosity is, again, a very basic intuition, a very basic characteristic of us human beings. Let's build on this, but not in an antagonistic sense. It's more like opening up a sense of discovery.
Yeah, maybe I can add something, because I think it's an important topic also to burst those bubbles. And what we do a lot, or what I do a lot, is we are creating like social sculptures, experiences, where we are managing to get people through culture from various backgrounds to participate. So we developed a festival, was called, for example, the Playground Festival, and it was a parkour where we allowed grown-up people to be children again. And it was actually a fashion lounge event of a fashion label which I was running. And so to be able to go into this secret exhibitions, they had to play themselves through this parkour of creativity which we developed. And so we engaged there, for example, musicians from electronic, with an electronic background, with a classic background. We had performance artists. We had workshops and different types of experiences. And so we had over 2,000 people coming to this event. And in the end, we had the ravers coming there, the young hip-hoppers coming there, the do-no-goods. Everyone was there, the top CEOs of the companies in Latvia. So everyone was there because everything was there for everyone. And I think their culture and arts kind of helped them to come together and have a common experience. Of course, if I would have just made a rave, for example, then I would only have the ravers. But we designed it in such a way that it was exciting and interesting for everyone. And so suddenly the CEO of a big company was dancing with the ravers, and the ravers were workshopping together with the CEO. So I think this is something at least I enjoy, and I don't think arts has to be like this or culture has to be like this, but I think it's possible, and we do it through social sculptures and experiences.
We call it designing the journey. So you start with something familiar, something people can relate to, and then you can surprise them with something else. So it's about coming out there, inviting people for the journey, and then
I don't know. I don't know about bubbles, but I do know that when you gave the monkey the tools, or when she took the tools, she became curious. There was something there, and I'm fascinated by this idea that we create an environment where people can get involved, and there are things. And actually, I know she was copying a lot, but actually, you do copy, and there's you're even if you're in your own bubble, if we can access these bubbles, and there are new opportunities or new tools that are given, people will be curious, and we shouldn't be afraid of that. Absolutely.
Okay, the last question. My name is Anna Lidinyova. I came from Ukraine. I present Buryak Curatorial Group, and we do cultural projects to do with public art. And currently we work outside the capital, outside Kiev. We work in a city with 200,000 population, Bila Cerkva. We do a sculpture symposium. And this is a big thing for the city, which never had such a project. And my question is that how you, to start with, that we did study the audience, we did conversations with the local governments and the businesses, and they supported us. But still, in each project there could be there is a negative reaction of the residents, of the citizens, and that even that we have the educational program where we tell about what it is going to be, how the public art changes the city and the society and the culture and even influences the economy. But still, it's not that we're getting the negatives now, but we know that there are some maybe groups of people who think, okay, they came here and doing something which is not maybe important because we need to build roads and not invest in the culture. So maybe you can suggest how to work with these groups of people. So we take a note of that as an experience. Thank you.
This for Virginia. I can just say that, you've mentioned, maybe it's a language thing also, but you said that you have educational program where you teach people on contemporary art, what you're doing and so on. And I think that it might be a bit of a part of the problem, because I believe in what Paul said, I like to learn a few new things. I really do. I love to learn new things, and I learn every day. But I don't that much I don't like being taught. So it's maybe about actually learning from them what they think the art is and what you're doing there, or co-creating that journey together. Maybe that might be the solution, but she's an expert, I can give it to Virginia. No, in a community work you do the, brilliant job.
Actually, we have a very strong legacy from Vilnius, European Capital of Culture. One of the sculptures which became most prominent sculpture in Lithuanian history. I don't know how it's titled in English. Arch, but people call it a pipe. It's some kind of industrial metal pipe in the very center of the city. Nothing very extraordinary, nothing negative in it, but just it's not beautiful. I believe it's very good engine for discussions, and I can't imagine it would stop ever, because as our speakers today mentioned so many times, Duchamp's thing, so this pipe is on our tongue also in every cultural discussion. And even then we talk with some journalists or with our local government, they ask us as a team, please don't build any pipes on the occasion of European Capital of Culture. So it became a joke, and I think it always will be people who will not like, but of course if we are going to public space, the process should be also quite long. You cannot just put point in the city without previous discussion, but it's not possible that everybody will love the result after that.
We still have time for one more question.
Hello, I'm Jonas, photographer from Lithuania. Could you share your personal opinion or experience on could community create art or art create the community?
And this question is addressed to for everyone.
I just loved it. It's both, and I loved it. It's there's nothing to actually to add. You said it all. It's both. It can be both. It's beautiful.
I agree. Yes.
I have to go to the toilet.
So it's also nice final touch.
We were hoping for a break between.
So, thank you all.